All right, let's talk about a situation that's frankly a total nightmare for any manager. An employee gets arrested. What do you do? What does the law say about their job? In Ethiopia, this isn't just complicated, it's a legal minefield. One wrong move, and it could be a disaster. So today, we're going to try to make sense of it. So yeah, let's just put it out there. The big question. You get that call. One of your employees is in police custody. Or maybe you're on the other side. You're the family member trying to figure this all out. Can the company fire them? It's the most important question, and the answer, well, it's not a simple yes or no. To even start to answer that, we have to dig into the legal framework. But I'll warn you right now, this isn't a textbook case with a clear yes or no. The law lays out a very specific path, and everything, I mean everything, depends on the exact situation. And that brings us to the absolute heart of the matter. Before we can even whisper the word termination, we have to get our heads around the difference between two key legal ideas. Get this one distinction, and you'll understand why this is so complex. Okay, so the two big words we've got to deal with here are detention and imprisonment. In Amharic, you'll hear them as israt versus kitat. Now, they might sound kind of similar, but in the world of Ethiopian labor law, they couldn't be more different. They lead to two totally separate outcomes for an employee's job. And here they are, laid out side by side. It's like a fork in the road. On one side, you've got detention. This is key. It's before a conviction. The person is just a suspect. Here, the law says the contract is only suspended. But then look at the other side, imprisonment. This happens after someone is found guilty. And that's when the door to termination actually opens. So let's drill down on detention for a second. The most important word here is temporary. The person is being held. Maybe the police are investigating. Maybe they were denied bail, whatever the reason. But the critical point is this. They have not been found guilty yet. And during this stage, their job is specifically protected from being terminated. Article 18.3 of the Labor Proclamation spells it all out. If someone is detained for up to 30 days, their contract is suspended. They are not fired. Simple, right? Well, there's a huge catch. The employer has to be told about it, or they have to be in a position where they should have known. If the family stays quiet and the employer is completely in the dark, all that job protection can just disappear. Now, let's flip to the other side of that coin, imprisonment. This is a totally different ballgame. We're not talking about suspects anymore, we're talking about convictions. A court has handed down a guilty verdict and a sentence. This is the point where the law says an employer can actually start considering termination. So, Article 27 gives employers two possible routes for termination. The first one is basically just simple math. Is the prison sentence for more than 30 days? And does it mean the employee can't come to work? If yes to both, the contract can be terminated. But the second one, that one's a lot more subjective. It's about whether the crime itself makes the employee unfit for their specific job. In that case, it doesn't even matter what the sentence was. It could have just been a fine. It's the nature of the crime that counts.
Okay, so at this point, you're probably thinking, all right, I get it. Detention equals suspension, conviction can equal termination. Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Well, this is where the story gets really messy. Because the real world doesn't fit into neat little boxes, and the highest court in Ethiopia has had let's just say, a very difficult time applying these rules consistently.
Just think about it for a second. What if someone's detained for, say, 45 days, but they're never actually sentenced? Article 18 only talks about suspension for up to 30 days. And Article 27 says you need a conviction to terminate. So what happens in that gap? That legal no man's land? This is exactly where all the confusion and chaos starts. And the result? It's been total chaos. Just look at this timeline from the cassation division. This is the highest court, so their rulings are supposed to be binding law. In 2010, the court says, yep, detention without telling the boss, that's grounds for firing. Then 5 years later, they do a complete 180. They rule that no, detention without a sentence is not a reason to fire someone. And then, you're not going to believe this, they flip again. They say that a detention over 30 days is grounds for termination, even without a sentence. It's just legal whiplash. And this isn't just me saying it's confusing. As one legal analysis put it, and I'm quoting here, this constant flip-flopping creates confusion and chaos. It's not some abstract legal debate. It affects real people, real jobs. I mean, how can an employer or an employee make a decision with any confidence when the highest court in the land keeps changing the rules of the game? But wait, there's more. To add yet another layer of complexity to this whole thing, you have to understand that Ethiopia's entire way of looking at this is, well, it's pretty unique. The law isn't really concerned with how bad the crime was in a moral sense. It's focused on something way more practical. The magic phrase here is job fitness, or barakat. And what this means is that even if an employee is convicted of a really serious crime, the only question the law asks about their job is this: can they still do the work? If the crime, no matter how awful it seems, doesn't actually stop them from performing their duties, it might not be a valid reason for termination. And you can really see how different this is when you look at other countries. In places like Egypt and Bahrain, the law talks about moral turpitude or dishonesty. It's all about the character of the person. In Slovakia, it's about whether the crime was intentional. But Ethiopia just sidesteps all of that moral judgment and asks a much simpler, more practical question. Does this conviction make you unfit for this particular job? So let's recap. We've got seemingly clear rules that are interpreted inconsistently by the courts based on a unique legal standard. But the rabbit hole goes even deeper because there are some fundamental legal questions here that are just completely unanswered.
Okay, try to wrap your head around this scenario. An employer fires someone. That person then sues, saying the firing was illegal. While that case is slowly making its way through the courts, the employee gets convicted of a totally separate crime, but one that's related to their old job. The employer then turns around and says, "See, this new conviction proves I was right to fire them all along." You can see how this opens up a massive can of worms.
And that leads us to the first huge unanswered question. If a court agrees with the employer and uses that new conviction to justify the firing, when did the termination legally happen? Was it way back on the day the employer first fired them, or is it effective from the date of the court's decision, which could be years later? The law is completely silent on this, and the answer makes a huge difference for things like back pay and benefits. And this brings up an even more basic question. Who is actually doing the firing here? The labor law is super clear. Only an employer can start the termination process. But in this situation, if the court is the one that's changing the whole legal reason for the firing long after it happened, isn't the court the one terminating the contract? And right there, you have a fundamental legal paradox. On one hand, the labor law says, black and white, only an employer can kick off a termination. But on the other hand, you have court precedent where a judge is essentially rewriting history, changing the legal basis for that termination. So you have to ask, is the court stepping over a line here? Is it basically firing someone itself? It's a direct conflict, and there's no clear answer. So where does that leave everyone? You've got employers and employees trying to navigate this, but the ground is constantly shifting beneath their feet. With a legal framework that's in flux and precedents that literally contradict each other, the simple act of dealing with an employee's arrest becomes this incredibly high-stakes gamble. So the final question isn't just, what does the law say today? It's, what could it say tomorrow? And can anyone really be prepared for that answer?